Eh, not that memorable.
Those were up, and they did.
Or smarts, and my...
He told me enough.
No, I.
Here's Chuck.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review. And this movie review is going to be for what was easily the 19th film of the MCU, the 19th film of the Infinity Saga. And of course, it's going to be for what to me is the very last second installment of the Infinity Saga anyways. And this is where this character's standalone story ends. And that film is going to be for none other than July 2018's Ant-Man and the Wasp, directed by Peyton Reed. And as you can tell by after past me broke into my room and stole my review for Infinity War when I was just about to come up and do that review, he somehow stole my gauntlet, escaped from his world, came into mine with it, and now suddenly he's all so powerful and has creative control over my videos. And now he's making me do it in the original background for this. All of a sudden. And yeah. So I have to review in this background basically because I'm locked from getting to my original one. Until I finish the series. So this is nice. And it's just so I can have creative control of my channel back. Anyways, that being said, what is this film about? Well, Scott Lang's on house arrest after the events of Cap Civil War. Hank and Hope have completely cut ties with them after he used their equipment. But eventually, one day, a few days before the end of his arrest, Scott Lang somehow then gets a dream of the original WASP, Janet Pym. And then this pretty much brings him into contact with Hank and Hope, who then think he might have a way of bringing back Janet, and Janet might still be alive. And of course, they pretty much have to evade a new foe named Ghost, and some other baddies too, in order to get Janet back, free from the quantum realm. So anyway, how was this made? Well, in June 2015, Ant-Man director Peyton Reed expressed interest in returning for a sequel or prequel to that film because he had really fallen in love with the characters and felt there was a lot of story to tell with Hank. A month later, Pym's actor Michael Douglas said he was not signed for additional films, so would look forward to more if it comes his way, and expressed a desire to have his wife, Catherine Zeta-Jones, cast as Janet Van Dyne for a potential follow-up. Yvonne Lee Lilly, who played the daughter of Pym and Van Dyne, Hope Van Dyne, wanted to see Michelle Pfeiffer for the role. Producer Ken Feige revealed that the studio had a super cool idea for the next Ant-Man film, and if audiences wanted, they would have to find a place to do it. And Reed even mentioned that there have been talks of making a standalone adventure with Hank Pym as Ant-Man, possibly including the original opening to Ant-Man featured Jordy Mullen, which was cut from the final film. Eric Eisenberg of Cinema Blend opted that a standalone adventure with Pym and the cut sequence would be a good candidate to revive the Marvel one-shot short film series. By the end of July, David S. Malkan expressed interest in returning for a sequel as Kurt. Then in October 2015, Marvel Studios confirmed the sequel titled Ant-Man and the Wasp with a scheduled release date of July 6, 2018. Reed was in negotiations to direct the sequel by the end of the month and announced his return in November, and the confirmation of Paul Rudd and Lilly returning as Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne, respectively. And despite being offered a chance to direct the sequels in the past, Reed had never done so out of a lack of interest, and was excited to work on Ant-Man and the Wasp because there was a lot of more story to tell with the characters that he had genuine affection and kind of protective feeling about. He was able to build a sequel from the ground up, and he joined the first one late in the process following the departure of original writer director Edgar Wright, and wanted to explore elements that he had set up in the first film. He began to work on an outline for the sequel, what he thought could be weird, unique, and different, and how the character's origins had been established. On being the first MCU film to have a female character in a title with the Wasp, Reed called it organic and noted the Wasp's final line at Ant-Man that it was about damn time and very much about her specific character arc in the movie, but it absolutely about a larger thing. And they were going to have a fully realized, very complicated hero in the next movie would happen to be a woman. Reed would push and ensure that Wasp received equal publicity and merchandise for the film, and wants to explore the backstory of Janet Van Dyne as well. And he had definite ideas of who should portray the character, and Reed even said the alternate title Wasp and the Ant-Man was briefly considered but was not chosen due to fan expectation, and given the comic history of the phrase Ant-Man and the Wasp. That month, Adam McKay, one of the writers of Ant-Man, expressed interest in even returning to write the film, and Douglas confirmed he was in talks to return as well. Reed even stated in early December that the film may even call back to the heist film genre and tone of Ant-Man, that Ant-Man and the Wasp have an entirely different genre template, and hopes to incorporate additional flashback sequences in the film and explore Pym's various identities from the comics and his psychology. Reed stated he was excited about exploring and discovering the film version of Ant-Man and the Wasp relationship that is a romantic partnership and a heroic partnership. In the comics, a different dynamic that we've seen in the rest of the MCU was an actual partnership. Additionally, Reed mentioned that pre-production would probably start in October 2016. The filming is scheduled for early 2017. Original writers for the first film, Gabriel Farai and Andrew Barr, signed on to write the script along with Rudd, and writing stated in earnest in January 2016. Next month, the case stated he would be involved with the film in some capacity. Then by April, the four writers and Reed had been holed up in a room brainstorming the story, and Reed promising they would have stuff that they had never seen in a movie before. And Feige even stated they wanted to stay true to what made Ant-Man unique and different, and teased the potential of seeing the Giant Man version of Lane that had been introduced in Civil War. Despite being intimately involved in the writing and the development of the script, Reed did not take the receiving writing credit on the film. Now, after the film was shot and marketed, Ant-Man and the Wasp had its world premiere in Hollywood on June 25th, 2018, and would be released in the United States in the theaters on the release date it actually kept, did not get changed. One of the few Marvel films to keep its release date on July 6, 2018 as part of Phase 3 of the MCU. Much like the first film, this was also a critical commercial success, and it received praise for its performances, particularly those of Rudd and Lilly, humor and levity, and it grossed more than the first one with $622 million worldwide. And a sequel was released this year, in February. As for my reaction, well, the only time I remember seeing this film is when it came out in theaters, and I haven't rewatched it since. When I first saw it, I found it, well, good. Not really as memorable as the first film, as it was mostly just kind of meant to serve as a comfort relief for fans after the tragic ending of Infinity War broke everyone's hearts. It was kind of meant to show how the snapped victims were kind of going to come back. Or hint. The movie mostly just served to set up the time heist for Endgame. And the whole premise is Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym's wife, is trying to get saved from the quantum realm while Ant-Man's under house arrest. The story was simple enough and built around, which is why it was pretty good. The first act, yeah, even though the first act was definitely a tad bit slow, but not boring, it's the kind of setup where the characters are and had some fun action, especially with the introduction of the Wasp. The second act is also kind of boring, the pace dipping and nothing exciting happening. The third act does pick up the pace, and the chunk of the action was in the last 30 minutes, but that was my favorite part. The villain antagonist of the movie Ghost wasn't bad, but not nearly really that interesting. She had a reason to be there, but didn't add anything significant with the plot, except for fancy powers, which made for good effects. Michael Douglas's performance and Paul Rudd were definitely still the best characters in the movie, as they were serious when they needed to be and funny when they needed to be. The Wasp, like I said before, was cool, but that's good enough performance from Yvonne and Lilly. Michelle Pfeiffer did well in the role she was given, even though she doesn't have much screen time, except for the ending, and had good chemistry in his Gene Seattle with Michael Douglas. And seeing it for myself, Ant-Man the Wasp definitely could have been better, and it has its faults, like somewhat the same a little bit more as the first Ant-Man, which was kind of expected when I first saw the trailers. The script is mostly fine, and it has some patchy moments, mainly the overly wordy and sometimes overcomplicated jargon and inconsistent humor, while the humor mostly works wonders, and there are a few instances where it's not so funny and not very well paced. Examples would be such as in some emotional scenes that are quite poignant and heartwarming, and they then get interrupted by a joke that's not only forced and funny, but also not belonging in the scene. More so sporadically, thankfully, than before, though. The family scenes are also kind of a mixed bag. Some scenes are sweet and touching, the chemistry can be fine at times, other times they're a little flat and predictable, and sometimes the chemistry can be kind of mean, contributing towards a few rare dull stretches in a film that's generally inappropriately lighter in tone and faster paced. And honestly, like many people here, I also just found the villains not very enjoyable and underwhelming. Like, Birch is especially pointless and forgettable, and only really there because there needs to be an obligatory villain when there actually could have just been one. Like, Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War, most of the Phase 3 stuff lately had only had one villain. And they, especially Thanos, has proven to be some of the best villains in the Marvel canon after so many letdown generic ones. And Ghost fares a little better, and it's definitely an improvement over Darren from the first movie. But her problem is that her backstory is just very rushed and it didn't feel developed enough. Michelle Pfeiffer is wasted in a very underwritten plot device role because she's only in flashbacks in the ending scene. One great thing about this movie, though, is definitely the relationship between Hope and her mother Janet in the flashback scenes. Like with Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, this one explored the idea of love extending beyond space and time, and the writers did so with the details that were already established in the story. The relationship between the main two female characters can be described as a game of hide and seek, and Hope's motivation in the film was simply finding her motivation here, like how she always lost the game in her childhood. The sequel is somewhat a lot like the first one, except Hope the Wasp plays an expanded role, while learning to upgrade soon, boasting a much more developed skill set than Scott, aka Ant-Man, and they do work well together. And after Hank and Hope drag Scott away from his ongoing 2-year house arrest, and Scott's efforts to avoid being caught leaving his house even lead to some funny exchanges between him and Randall Park's law enforcement officer, who was often impressed by Scott's newly learned close-up magic tricks. And I think Randall Park in this movie is definitely a criminally underappreciated comic actor. And it was definitely great to see him have a chance to play a significant role in a hit movie like this one. And then after this, he went on to play in this rom-com film that hit Netflix. I forgot the name of the movie, but if you guys know the name of this movie, tell me in the comments below. But I remember watching it Valentine's Day. It has Keanu Reeves actually play a fictional version of himself in one scene. That I do remember, but I forget the name of it. Tell me if you guys know, some of you who do know the name of it, tell me in the comments below. But Scott does manage to avoid getting caught, and he's able to help his pal, so everything is going smoothly, and that is until a woman with ghost powers, aka the Ghost, shows up and even steals a new tech he's building to save his wife from the quantum realm, and Ant-Man and the Wasp have to battle the Ghost and help the Ghost because help is what she is actually seeking. Her powers aren't really powers either. And they're like a curse that causes her great pain. The Ghost character, not that great of a villain, but she's fairly interesting. But she should have been a little more so interesting, because she just feels uneven. Like in one scene, she just comes across as this awkward, creepy flirt, and then she never returns to any similar behavior, which is disappointing. It's kind of weird seeing her hit on Scott in her own bizarre way, and it would have been a far more entertaining personality than the angry blank slate we see just throughout the rest of the film. And I couldn't quite figure out what she was supposed to be. I don't think the filmmakers could be either. In much of the movie, I suspected there are plenty of laughs, such as a few moments where the size regular on Scott's suits malfunction. It causes him to grow and shrink at the most inopportunity times, and are particularly hilarious. Specifically, one of the scenes in particular has him literally shrink to kid size when he has to go get the original suit from Cassie, and he has to remain in kid form because Cassie took the trophy for show and tell for her class, and now he's pretty much in kid form the rest of the scene. And his running is even funny too, as well. Let's not forget, Louis, Michael Pena's character, is fire once again, and rattles off a cover of his character's classic Mortar Mouth stories, one while under the influence of a substance that may or may not be true serum, was probably the funniest part of him in this movie. Because, you even literally have Hope Van Dyne okay, you have Lewis pretty much impersonating Hope Van Dyne, and then those little flashbacks, you literally see hear Hope Van Dyne pretty much talking Louise's voice, and almost any of the characters talking in Lewis's voice, even. So that pretty much got the biggest laugh out of me in this movie, as well, because I just love Lewis in these two films. He's just enjoyable to watch. He's one of the best things of these Ant-Man films, easily. And the cast was great once again. Paul Rudd proved again he's the perfect Ant-Man. The banter of the Witness was endless. And the chemistry between him and Yvonne Lilly was on point. And in general, all the characters did very well here. And because basically Yvonne Lilly, Hope Van Dyne, was actually much more likable here because I kind of hated Hope Van Dyne in the first one. I thought she was kind of annoying in the first film. Here, I thought they actually kind of improved her much better. As the film progressed, she starts to become a much more developed character this time around. So that was nice to see that Penn Reed at least improved her character. Penn Reed, unlike the first one, Penn Reed just kind of delivers an average film, and it doesn't really fix any of the existing problems in the first movie. He doesn't really fix mistakes, but he kind of adds more of them in this sequel. The action scenes are pretty well developed, but just like the first movie, there's not too many of them. This villain problem even continues here. The editing is just really well. The editing is still really well done though. Like when to cut to each scene, like making the battle sequences at least easy to follow whenever they do happen. And now speaking of Ghost, I may not like some of the villains, but I don't love or hate the villains in this film. To be honest, they're just, now that I think about it, there's not really a villain in this movie. Now, I didn't mind Hannah John Kraman's performance, but I did have a problem with her character creativity. Like, if she was recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D., where was she the entire time? Like in the Winter Soldier, why didn't S.H.I.E.L.D. just send her and the Winter Soldier to take down Cap? Perhaps she was kept away in the dark, and not even Fury had access to, or even Hydra. But wasn't that even mentioned or elaborated? I don't think she needed that kind of exposition. However, I did really like that they actually got Lawrence Fishburne in this movie, who was fresh out of the DCU, and then immediately decided to star in the MCU. So pretty ironic how one actor literally appears in both superhero universes. And he takes up the father figure role of Ghost. I was expecting to just be kind of just a quick seconds role, but it was a very nice surprise too. So I like that they did not waste Lawrence Fishburne this time around. And Walter Goggins does his thing with a southern accent, but I didn't feel like his role was necessary in this film. And I do think the action is way more amplified in this one than it was in the first. Not to say the first one didn't have great action scenes, because it did. But I like they didn't try to redo what they did in the first film. They kind of spiced up a little with Ghost, who faces more than Vision ever did in his screen time so far in the MCU and Infinity Saga as a whole. It was nice to see Ant-Man go giant again after Civil War, and Wasp fight scenes are kinetic and full of energy. And shrinking scenes are even fantastic, and the usage of ants are still fun and unique. When it comes to my favorite scenes of the movie, once again, like the first movie, I think my favorite scenes of the movie are pretty much Scott's scenes between him and Cassie. Easily. And I think their scenes are even better in this one as well, but one scene that really stands out in particular is when Scott and Cassie have this little talk where Scott says that his family is paying the price for whatever he's doing, but Cassie then cheers him up by saying that he is doing the right thing. And this scene just shows what an important driving force is Cassie is in Scott's life, and pretty much kind of gives him the motivation he needs to kind of fix his mistakes here. So, and I like in this movie that Scott Lang does acknowledge his mistakes here and stuff. It's really improved character development right there. Now that's what a sequel needs. Whenever you have a protagonist in your first film, and if you ever make a sequel, you also need to improve their character development and make them, and actually just, if they are cocky in the first film, make them less cocky in the sequel. You can have them start off in the sequel, but they kind of start to slowly change and realize their errors as the film progresses. Other sequels, like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, are prime examples of that. And I also did like the end of the movie, because we're in the quantum realm. Hank nearly loses his signal, but he finally manages to locate Janet and her coordinates, and they reunite with a kiss, so they're finally able to rescue Janet. And the lab has grown to its normal size, and Ava and Bill are planning to get Janet's quantum energy. Hank and Janet even start to return as Ava and Bill begin the process, which starts to drain Janet. Scott and Hope then show up and disable their machine, giving Hank and Janet enough time to come out of the quantum realm. Hope then reunites with her mother at last, and Janet then sees Ava's prompt, and she puts her hands on Ava to stabilize her and stop her phasing. Everyone leaves as the heroes take the lab, and Bill wants to keep protecting Ava, so I like that, despite some of the crimes Ava's done, Bill Foster decides not to leave her after all and still decides to keep looking after her while they go into hiding for their crimes. So that was nice to see that Bill Foster's still not willing to give up on Ava. even though she tells them they need to split up. And outside the lab, David and Kirk help Lewis incapacitate Birch and his goons before ejecting him with troop storm as the cops arrive, leading to their arrest. And Wu thinks he knows Scott's out on the streets as Ant-Man, but because he sees like Ant-Man's giant man suit form just standing behind Billy, he's like, I got you. Now you're going to jail. But of course, we know Scott not even in that suit, as he's actually had just got out of it in the nick of time before Wu could arrive, and he's running back to his house quick. And so Wu then finds out Scott's not in the suit, so he goes back to his place and finds Scott actually there just drumming, like literally kind of like not listening to them and just drumming with his like earphones on, acting like he's still on house arrest and nothing's wrong at all. And then Wu gets him to stop drumming because he's trying to tell him Scott his sentence is over and he's now a free man. And the first thing Scott does is go see Cassie, not in his house this time, at her place. And in the end, Lewis gets a new client for his business to keep them from going under, so Lewis' business gets saved. And since Hank's still a fugitive, he brings Janet to the beach where they set up this new house on the beach as he grows peacefully where nobody can find them. And Scott shrinks himself, hoping Cassie in a car so they can use a laptop as a screen like a drive-in movie theater with a bunch of other toy cars surrounding them. And it's very nice here. Hope actually finally meets Cassie for the first time in this scene. So I really like they both finally got to meet. And Hope even asks Cassie what she wants to be when she grows up. And Cassie replies that she wants to be just like her dad, and then... But of course, like, they have a little funny moment where they're bothered by a large butterfly. And then the credits roll there. But the movie's not completely over. Because while this movie was supposed to be a cover from Infinity War, Hank and Janet, since they're going to give Ava more PIM particles to keep her stabilized, they set up a quantum tunnel and van on the rooftop with Hope's hope so that Scott can enter it. And because they don't have a base anymore because they're still fugitives, he obtains quantum energy to keep helping Ava be stabilized. And just as Scott is ready to go back, the others fail to bring him back because like their walkie-talkie goes out of signal randomly. But Scott thinks they're just screwing around. But he doesn't know that because he's in the quantum realm. And when we cut back to the quantum tunnel parking lots, Hank, Janet, and Hope pretty much lost a signal because they were, remember Infinity War? Turned to dust by Thanos' finger snap. So this post-credit scene was set during the pretty much right after the snap from Infinity War. And this movie was pretty much set a few days before Infinity War. And so pretty much this movie just ends with Scott trapped in the quantum realm. And this is a good post-credit scene to remind everyone that Infinity War still happened. And show what pretty much happened to Scott during the whole dusting and blip here. But also, there comes the sad thing is, the bad side. It also just makes this movie kind of pointless. Because Janet also just dies again anyways. So what was kind of the point of this movie if she was just going to be among the victims? Kind of doesn't make sense. But, well then again, although, to be honest, I don't think it would have had much of an impact if that happened. But there's another post-credit scene, like most of San Francisco appears to have felt the effects of the gauntlets, and they're now in a state of emergency. You hear this haunting sound on the TV, like alarm on the TV, that's pretty much signifying the message. But unfortunately, like if that was just it, and you just hear the alarm going through the whole house on the TV, and then it just cut to black after that, no comedy right there, that would have been perfect, but this part kind of ruined the effects. Because we cut to a giant ant who's in Scott's apartment playing on his drum set, and I feel like we didn't need a moment of comedy there. That just kind of ruined the effect of the scene. We could have just had the alarm going off, and that would have been perfectly chilling. No, let's just have a joke where the ant's playing the drums. It wasn't funny. It was just kind of really, we already saw before. We didn't need to see it again. And then the final text reads, Ant-Man and the Wasp will return, except with a question mark at the end. Because, Scott's fate is ambiguous, but we know Scott was going to escape somehow. we already knew he was going to escape in Endgame, because he was going to be in Endgame. Like, there were set photos of him on the Endgame set, so he's coming back. We knew he'd get out. The Wasp is definitely ambiguous because she's, well, dead. But, however, this movie does come with some bad qualities, and it's exactly why this movie's kind of forgettable compared to the first. Once again, like the previous film, Hank Pym's character is kind of poorly developed. The film's villain Ghosts exists because, like, I've already mentioned this, generic is kind of not really that great of a villain, but just exists because of him being a jerk in the first place and not acknowledging her father's work. And yet the conflict between the characters resolved without Pym being forced to change. And it was kind of the same egotistical douche describing his youth at the end of the film. There's kind of no apologies or struggles or choices touched to change his character. And I'll get more to his character in a bit. And unfortunately, the Paxton couple, Maggie and Jim, are back in this movie. And I still really don't like them because they just annoy me in every scene they're in these two films. Thankfully, they are just cameos in this movie. And they're not nearly as annoying and unlikable as they were in the first movie, so that was a relief. And I like Maggie Lane and Jim Paxton were much more supportive of Scott this time. Especially because I did not like them in the first film, because I felt they were such assholes to Scott in the first film, so I think they were much nicer to him and actually were more supportive of his decisions this time around. And while Randall Park did give a good performance, I just didn't really like the character of Jimmy Woo, because I thought he was just kind of bland. He did have some funny moments, but he was just kind of just there to be Scott's house arrest officer. And this movie doesn't really serve much of a purpose in MCU, except to set up the Time Heist and bring back the original Wasp, Janet, and that was it. And of course, well, the movie's just pointless anyway, because Janet's just going to get snapped away. Regardless. And then back to Hank. One other problem, besides just Hank not being a well-developed character, it's just with kind of Hank and Hope. Like, I didn't like Hope in the first half of the movie. She was kind of still the unlikable character she was in the first film with the first half of the sequel. But thankfully, she starts to get much better in the later half of the movie. But as for Hank Pym, my god. I honestly just hated Hank Pym in this sequel because most of the movie, he's such a jerk. To Scott Lang, all because he basically used their suit in Civil War. Like, for Pete's sakes, it's not Scott Lang's fault that Zemo was pretty much threatening the world and Cap needed people on his side because Tony and his fraction weren't going to help them because they signed the Accords. Cap was, I mean, and it's not Scott's fault he didn't know about that whole Avengers base was going to alert, that heist at the Avengers base was going to alert Falcon and then have Falcon likely try to get his help. It's not his fault Civil War happened. Like, for goodness sakes. So yeah, this movie's just not as good and just much weaker than the first film, but I think it's a fine cheer up fans after Infinity War and a good foreshadowing of Endgame. In the end, Ant-Man and the Wasp was a sequel that's just worth a streaming if you want to be cheered up from Infinity War and want to see how the snap will imply to be come back, but don't expect anything memorable like the first film had. Anyways, that's it for my review of Ant-Man and the Wasp, and we're going to rank Ant-Man and the Wasp. Here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you love the first film, were depressed from Infinity War, and want some comfort from it and be hinted at Endgame's events, then I would mostly recommend streaming this movie because it just doesn't have that much of a point to it, except for those reasons I just mentioned. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Ant-Man and the Wasp, I'm going to give Ant-Man and the Wasp a 7 out of 10. There we go. That's also my review for Ant-Man and the Wasp. So, now that I've wrapped that review up, guess what we finally get to move on to? We can finally move on to the very, 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 very last film of the MCU. Do that rewatch because this is the one I'm excited for. No, future me. What do you mean, no, past me? Avengers Endgame comes after Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's how the story order goes. It sets up Avengers Endgame. So technically speaking, you're wrong, because that movie is next. Oh, really? Well, haven't you forgotten there was a certain female superhero movie that came a month before it, you big idiot? Idiot? Fuck you, past me. You're the idiot. Actually, no, you are, because you're trying to cheat the rules, and don't forget what happens if you try to cheat. So wait, you're saying I have to review that character's piece of shit solo movie?
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Alright, fine. And past me, I don't know how the hell you can suddenly steal different voices now all of a sudden.
I just can. The gauntlet literally gave me that trick. In fact, I think I like this power and I think I'll keep using it to
Whatever.
annoy you.
I don't know what this moron thinks. Till then, guys, I guess that'll be it for this review. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this and want to see more, man, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.